Pick a scripture that would it would take longer for him to walk up than it would to read it. I'm detecting some envy over here in this corner. We're just going to let that go. Yes. Oh boy, that's a perfect lead in, wasn't it? Socrates was probably one of the greatest minds that's ever lived, philosophical mind, and he had this to say about envy. Envy is the filthy slime of the soul, a venom, a poison, a quicksilver, which consumes the flesh and dries up the marrow of the bones. Gee, I wonder how he really felt about envy. Wow. Envy is synonymous in Scripture with what you might think it would be synonymous with it. And the words are almost interchangeable. Jealousy, passion, desire, coveting. There's a commandment about that one. Are all connected to and interchangeable with envy. And we get a real interesting perspective on this, and Mark gives it to us in the seventh chapter of his gospel. And he tells us a story about Jesus and the Pharisees kind of raking him and his disciples over the coals because his disciples would not honor the tradition of the elders. And traditions are dangerous things because traditions get established for a particular point, to emphasize a particular point. But traditions take on a life of their own. And pretty soon, the point is no longer remembered, just the tradition. And in this case, it was a tradition. It wasn't a commandment from Moses, from God through Moses to them. It was just a tradition. And the tradition was that the disciples of Jesus were not ceremoniously washing their hands before they ate. Being attacked, Jesus responded with two key points. And this is the first one. Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Do you think he thought it was important? Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it is what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. Point one. And his disciples didn't get it. So privately, when he was away from the crowds, the disciples again asked him about it. And Jesus makes his second point, a point of clarification. What comes out of a man makes him unclean, for out of men's hearts comes murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. The point he's trying to make, it's not what is outside of us that comes into us that defiles us. It is what is in us that comes out of us through our words and our actions that defile us and hurt others. Envy is the captain of a legion of commonly related passions and desires that create in us heart disease. The expression of envy occurs early and often in the Bible. In the 4th chapter of Genesis, we are told that Cain kills his brother Abel out of envy. In the 28th chapter, the Philistines envy Isaac because he has vast herds and flocks and numerous servants, and so they stop up all of his wells in retaliation. By the 20th chapter, we're told that Rachel envies Leah because Leah had several children, but Rachel is barren. The 32nd chapter, we find out that it was because of envy that Joseph's brothers sell him into captivity and slavery into Egypt, to travelers going to Egypt. And see, that's just the book of Genesis. I think a great case can be made in the New Testament that it was envy over the miracles, the crowds, the wisdom in the teachings, and the closeness that Jesus claimed to have with the Father that led the religious leaders to crucify him. Envy. Now, we Christians wouldn't really admit, much less confess, that we have ever been envious or had envy over anything or anyone, would we? But think about this with me. Suppose it's the dead of winter. Say it's about January the 20th. And the nighttime temperature is about -8. You're turning up the thermostat in the house and get out your tablet or your laptop or your smartphone and you start scrolling through there as you're trying to sip some hot tea to get warm. And lo and behold, there are your best friends taking selfies at some Caribbean island. No, we're not envious. You know, you got that brand new Hyundai, and man, it came with all the bells and whistles, and you were so happy about that. Until you see your neighbor drive up in his driveway with a brand new Infiniti G35. No, we're not envious. Personal story, I confess. We were at Oak Hill. I hadn't been there long. I was still trying to learn names. Welcome to your world, right, Bill? Still trying to learn the names and stuff, and been there just about a week or two, and had the local newspaper and all 4 pages of it. And I was flipping through there, and I see this picture of a sort of a familiar face, and this person has won like $1 million in our community from a sweepstakes at BioLab. Now, you do understand when somebody wins $1 million, they don't get $1 million. You understand that? I mean, first of all, the IRS is going to say, us, yours. And yet people usually take a time lapse, so much per year. It's still a lot of money. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, that face is familiar. And so I asked my wife, and she says, yes, that's David's wife. That's Phyllis. First thought that came out of my mouth, well, I sure hope they tithe. Because I'm sitting there thinking 10% on that. Oh yeah, hot tub and covered porch at the parsonage. Envy, I believe, is the most dangerous of the 7 deadly sins. And why is that? It's because we can justify it with the excuse of unfairness, and we all hate unfair, don't we? That's not fair. That's not fair. And see, once we justify it, then bitterness and resentment begin to settle inside of our hearts, and it spreads and creates heart disease within us. And I want to suggest what I think are 3 symptoms of heart disease inside of us from envy. First one, contentment is stolen. Contentment is stolen. When Paul's writing to the church in Philippi, he shares these words of wisdom to them. I have learned the secret of being content in whatever the circumstance. And then just a couple of sentences down, as if to reinforce what he's already just said, he writes to them, I have learned the secret of being content. And there's 2 words that really are going to help us out with this. The first word is learned, and it means learn in this case means by use and by practice. So it's a repetitive process, a lifestyle, use and practice. The other word is content, and it means to stand independent of the circumstances. Have you ever been dependent on the circumstances? Is the circumstance driving you, leading you, motivating you, captivating you? See, envy takes what we have learned and practiced for contentment in life as a regular lifestyle, and it creates in us amnesia. We don't remember anymore. We forget all that we had used and practiced to implement contentment in our lives, and the very circumstances that we had once been independent from, we are now dependent on. And dependent on any circumstance destroys whatever dependence we had on God. what we have received from the hand and the grace of God now is no longer enough. I remember as a family, our youngest child, Matthew, was at the point that we could kind of take him out to eat and not cause a scene. And so it wasn't any fancy restaurants we were going to back in those days. You couldn't afford it. And besides, what was the point? But it's just kind of a general place. And come in, the waitress comes up, and we would order, and we would help him to pick up something to eat, which was probably usually chicken nuggets or hot dogs. And we get our food, and they would set the plates and stuff down. And first thing he would do is he'd lean over the table and look at what was on Gigi's plate. And he goes, "What's that?" And he goes, "I want what you got." Envy. Poor Gigi, she would have to give about half of what she ate up to him, and then the rest of us would have to divide what he didn't want and he had ordered, most of which we never liked in the first place, but that's a whole other story. Well, let's move on to the second symptom caused by envy for heart disease, and that's that gratitude is killed. Gratitude is killed. Once I become circumstance dependent, the appreciation I once had for all that God has blessed me with in my life slowly begins to sour. And I no longer have thankfulness for life and for living. I'm not talking about being above ground and breathing. I'm talking about losing the value of the key relationships that we have in life. Family and spouse, friends. About not being joyous and appreciative of having the basics in life, food and shelter and clothing. I become way more envious of what I don't have as opposed to being thankful for what I do have. A gratitude killer. And the third symptom of heart disease that envy can cause in us is that it destroys our relationship with God. Look, if I am no longer content and I'm no longer thankful for what God has blessed me with in my life, then I've already lost the most vital part of my relationship with God. I mean, my concepts of generosity and having enough become totally twisted in life. I may call myself a Christian, but if I live my life without contentment in God and without gratitude for what God has blessed me with, then at best I'm a practicing agnostic. Or at worst, I am like the Israelites in the desert who failed to appreciate anything that God did for them, and whom Beth Moore described in these words. People who don't believe in the God they said they believed in. Wow. No wonder they call envy a deadly sin. Now the question we all want to ask is there any treatment for this heart disease? Well, Dr. Peter Barjona writes this in 1 Peter 4:8. Love covers a multitude of sins. If there was ever a human being created who could appreciate having their sin covered, blotted out, veiled, it would be Peter, right? Because nothing heals, and nothing corrects, and nothing cures heart disease like love. I think Paul had that in mind when he penned the greatest piece of literature he ever penned in the Bible, in Corinthians 13. At the 4th verse, he writes this: love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy. And then in verse 8, he puts the capstone on it. Love never fails. There it is. See, that's the cure for heart disease. Where envy steals our contentment, love heals. Where envy kills our gratitude, love refills our heart with gratitude. Where envy destroys our relationship with God, love restores our relationship with God. One thing about Jesus, he was always so insightful about us human beings. And I guess that's because he was one. Remember? Yeah, he's exactly right. It's not the stuff on the outside that comes into us that defiles us. It's what's on the inside that comes out in our actions and words that hurt others and defile us. You know, the hymnist got it right. More love to thee, O God. More love to thee. We invite you to turn into your hymnals. Pages number 12.